will not be known to you, but he should be. And I immediately remembered a poem by him, which we learned at school, we cried over and recited. And it is a poem which could well have been written after the Great War, but it was actually written at the end of the century, the 19th century I'm talking about, and the beginning of the 20th century, as a response to the poet having been part of the Austro-Hungarian army. And it's a very, very moving poem. It definitely touches on the whole question of futility of war and who it is we are fighting for, really, who it is we are losing our life for. And what I did, because I looked on the internet and I couldn't find a translation of this poem, so I very quickly translated a fragment in the author's launch, which I'm going to read to you. The poem, and the name of the poet is Franjo Šramek. You wouldn't have heard of him. He was born in 1877 and died in 1952. And the poem is about a soldier. It's about a dream a soldier is having about reporting to his lieutenant. I report, my lieutenant, sir, that I had a dream. I was in a war, lying in the field, shot dead. And next to me, your horse. It was our fate to die side by side. I report, my lieutenant, sir, it was a terrible dream. The animal's eyes coming out of its sockets, of their sockets, the animal's eyes cried and screamed, asking me, why? Why are we lying here? So you have that question, why is this happening? And that question is being asked by the total innocent, the animal that is brought into the war field. From there, I thought, why do we only know the English language poets? And again, I did some searching, and I actually couldn't really find any translations of war poems written in other languages, translations into English, except for a small anthology online of poetry written by Jewish soldiers, Jewish German soldiers, and that's where we can see a terrible irony. There were names amongst them that we know, like Leon Feuchtwanger.
Yeah. Emmanuel Saul.
Yes, exactly, who wrote about the fatherland.
Yes.
Fatherland that then exterminated
in 20 years, the picture changed so completely. They became enemies of the fatherland.
And in this small anthology, I actually found a poem by somebody anonymous. What we know is only his surname. We don't know exactly who he was or where he was born. His name was Goldfeld, and he was killed in the war, but we know nothing more about him. But this poem survived, and it has been translated by Peter Appelbaum. To a missing friend, you have no grave, no cross, but you did die. Maybe in some dark thicket your bones lie, or you were sunk in swamp in deep of night, or Cossacks cruelly robbed you of the light. And when it was, and where and how, and why, I know not. Death in forest does not cry. You are a skull now, white bleached by the rain, round which the weasel lightly leaves its train. You are the plowed field on which horses stand. You are the grain that once did crown the land. You are the bread the farmer once did eat. You are the strength when peace returns to greet. I would say that the hope in the last line is a note of false hope, as we can see later, amidst all kinds of conflicts.
It's been a century of one conflict that has, it's almost been a competition of brutality. It's been, you know, we've just grown so sensitized to the whole thing. We've grown, I think we've developed fatigue, a kind of fatigue that prevents us from feeling horrified any longer at the brutality and the futility of war. You know, Sampurna, you've done a lot of work on the Iraq war. You know, I was going to sort of ask you about 100 poets, you know, against the war, and that's modern, you know, Iraq and the Gulf War, and you know, a lot of modern wars, for want of a better phrase.
Yeah. To quickly, can you hear me on this? Hello.
They can actually. Yeah.
Hello.
It doesn't have the reverb and the booming quality that mine does.
Excellent, yeah. You know, the thing about the anthology, I'm not the editor of the anthology. I happen to be a contributor. But what's interesting is when, you know, the whole thing about these are times in which I think we've never been this close to the way to war as we are in recent times. Perhaps because the image, the televised image, film, all of that, the way in which we know about these things has changed. And I think what happened just prior to the Iraq war was that there was this invite that was sent out by Laura Bush to the Poets of America to have a very clearly apolitical poetry reading at the White House. And every poet was sent one gilt-edged card, etc., etc. And a lot of the poets were deeply affronted by the callousness and the... I mean, it's just such a disgusting thing to do. So one poet, Sam Hamill, he sent out a protest letter saying that this is ridiculous. That was, I think, if I have the dates here, I think that was on the 19th of September. Just give me a second while I find the page. Yeah, it was, the 19th of January 2003. On the 20th of January, a couple of poets sitting in London decided to send out a call, an international call for entries protesting the war. Okay, so naturally they were inundated because in the age of email you'd get inundated. What they did was pretty heroic because they brought out these chapbooks. They just brought out these free chapbooks which people published, downloaded. This whole idea of copyright, which we published authors cling to for dear life, that was completely dismantled. It was all copyleft. You printed it on your printer, you bound it, and you disseminated it. Apparently, over 50,000 copies of these were circulated. And then this particular publishing house said, why don't we sort of commemorate it? Because I think partly this whole thing is also about lest we forget. So the machinery of commemoration is really about that. Of course, it never works because poetry does not change the course of wars.
And we do forget.
And we do forget again and again. Time. So this beautiful little book called 100 Poets Against the War was published. And it's quite fascinating because there are some which are direct responses to the Iraq war, like mine, a lot of the contemporary poets. Some are from previous times, and they are frighteningly resonant because it's still the same story. I'll just quickly read out the poem that I contributed to it. It's called Easy. Death is easy to pronounce. He deserved to die. They ought to be shot. Hangings too good for him. The words fall glib, throwaway lines, sentencing them to death. Distant observer, you speak without guilt or fear of misplaced allegiances. You just need something to say, that's all. The right sentiment rightly declared, whichever way your loyalties blow in the gust of the smoke-filled air. A country burns. The death dealers deserve to die, you say. Death is easy to pronounce. It's the smell of burning children that's hard.
It's actually horrifying. Sreyashi, I think, since we are talking about modern wars and modern post-war societies, you have done quite a bit of work in Africa, in Rwanda. And this particular kind of war that we've seen in Rwanda and many other African nations is something that probably a lot of us cannot yet identify with. Whether that is a blessing or a curse, I have no idea. But this war within one's own country, an apparently unending war between one's own peoples, it's something that African nations have grown sickeningly familiar with.
I mean, unfortunately, we've seen so many wars. We are still seeing so many wars of so many kinds, whether it's on terror, whether it's World War I, II, or whatever it may be. But unfortunately, we don't learn from it. And then we have art forms and art, which is a catharsis or a reaction to it, which when is documented.
And people will tell you that, 70 million, there were a total of, and this is not an exaggeration. I mean, you can.
And when we talk about genocide and Rwanda, and then once I went there and I walked there, it was amazing how the Hutus and the Tutsis were coming together, and the women, wars are fought over women's bodies, and we've always seen that. But then it's also a sort of a paradox in that sense, because women are the peacemakers, and particularly in Rwanda, what I saw, that they had this peace baskets, sort of capacity building, and it contributed to their livelihood. And it was lovely because the Hutus and the Tutsis were weaving baskets together. So that was a message, and that was wonderful. And in fact, I've also written my book, My Soul on a Platter, which was a reaction to my staying there in that environment. And it was appalling how Africa, I mean, I really lost my heart to Africa in that sense. Because sitting here in Calcutta, you're really nestled from all of that. And we're fortunate to be nestled from all of that. But
probably that also prevents us from feeling exactly what she felt. If more people felt, more people empathized, then probably there could be a solution. That's silly. Forget I said that. No, just if you could also, Alexandra, another modern war zone. And ironically, that's where it all started 100 years ago, Sarajevo, where, the wheel has come full circle.
Yes. I'd like to bring you the work of two Sarajevo poets, and one has to remember that that Europe and the European Union, of which I'm a citizen, was set up not only as an economic project, but also as a project to prevent the reoccurrence of war. And unfortunately, we still saw conflict, civil war in the ex-Yugoslavia in the 90s. And I don't know if many of you remember the siege of Sarajevo, but it was a siege which was the longest in the modern history of warfare. It lasted almost 4 years, and we should commemorate it because it happened 20 years ago. After the war, it was said, notably by Adorno and I suppose by others, that after the horrors of Auschwitz, for example,
okay, this one. This I can say with certainty.
Can you hear me? After the horrors of Auschwitz, it's not possible to write poetry. I don't know whether that's true or not. Certainly, poets have continued, but there was an attempt to also capture the horror of war and of the experience of concentration camps, for example, by simply letting the survivors speak, recording their testimonies. And this is what poet and writer and journalist Adisa Basic from Sarajevo did. And I will read you 3 very short pieces. Ignorance.
Maybe.
Can you hear the back?
Can you hear?
Yeah.
No. Did you hear what I said?
Okay,
Yes. Okay. What I said was that one way of capturing the horror is to let survivors speak. And this is what a Sarajevo poet and writer and journalist Adisa Basic did. And I will read you 3 short pieces. Ignorance. He said, "Cross yourself." And I crossed myself, but I didn't know how. And then he took the blunt edge of the axe to my hand. Believe me, my girl, I didn't know. Showering. They sway like algae as the guards wash them down with fire hoses. About 30 men I don't know, all naked, and Hyra Hodges, the bank teller, among them. To this day, as far as I know, the bodies have not been found. Birthday. We all gathered there in front of the car battery factory, and it was hot, July. Next to me, on the asphalt, a child was being born. And I will read you one last very short fragment from a long poem by another Sarajevo poet, Senadin Musabegovic, who was a soldier at the time of the siege. I watch the world through the eyes of children, playing at war amongst the walls of the burned down library. They kill each other, throw themselves against the dug up ground, cackling, their breath rolling between their crooked teeth that chatter with the fear of growing up.
Oh, wow. Stunning.
I think we had
Sure.
an answer. Why poetry? Because.
What else can
Oh
express
my God,
this
yeah.
better than poetry?
Thank you.
I think on that note, Sampurna, you can start on Pax Americana
Oh,
with that,
okay.
which is
We are being run on a very tight ship.
tight schedule.
Okay. So, you know this poem, I've just come across it like 2 days ago. I bought this Granta issue, which, as it happened, is called After the War. It has an excellent essay on Rwanda by a journalist who worked with UNICEF. But this particular poem I absolutely loved because I think it brings together everything. Why we write poetry, why we read poetry, and why we return to poetry. And it's called, rather befittingly, Pax Americana. It's by a poet I never heard of, Rowan Ricardo Phillips. In the desert, there is a pocket that is the poem. A watery bubble on an arid surface, like a fingertip on a voided screen that sparks to touch. The failed eavesdrop. It looks like life, or its mimesis here, among the droning decadence of dune after dune, shrugging as chrysanthemums shrug at a burning chrysanthemum sky. It looks like life, or its oasis. But now at the door, at the edge of enter or invade, of live as though no desert has ever known you, fathered you, been you, prayed for you. To behold the bubble now from within, the starry dome of pleasure above you, the palms perspiring mists made from quietly purring machines, no drones overhead, no school children scream. Thus, the poem, your one true savior, loves you.
Thank you. I think we don't really have time, or I would suspect scope for questions. There's not too much to say after this. Just in the memory of all soldier poets, I will bring the session to a conclusion. And we look forward to something a little more cheerful. Thank you, Alexandra, Sampurna, Sreyashi. It was wonderful having you here. And I think we shall continue this discussion off stage. This is just to announce ourselves off stage and to then ask you to be patient. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry? Oh, we tried. Thank you. Thank you, Vasant. We now await the arrival on stage of Shormila Tagore and Soumitra Chattarji for our very special session presented by EMTA titled Manik Ratan. এবং তাদের আলোচনার